I originally delivered at the Methodist Church back in February 2012. So it's got some moss growing on it, some mold growing on it. So I blew it off, and we'll see how it is. The title of it, you probably guess where I'm going here. Shh, don't tell anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it concentrates on the words of Jesus. I'm going to read some scripture to you here to start off with, and see if you can kind of catch on to a common theme that's occurring here. This first one is from Luke chapter 5. It's about a leper. And if you're not familiar with the disease of leprosy, it was an awful thing. Kind of bleached your skin out. You had open, oozing sores all over your body. It disfigured a person. Your digits would get eaten away, your toes, and people were hideous to look at. They were banished from society. They weren't allowed to live with people. They had leper colonies they had to stay in. They weren't allowed to attend church. And it was pretty much thought among the Jewish people, it's your own fault. You've got some kind of awful sin in your life, and this is God punishing you. And this, I'll pick this up in Luke chapter 5. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you were willing, you can make me clean." And that was what they were considered to be unclean. You're filthy human beings. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man, which you absolutely did not do. You did not touch. If a leper came into town, he had to start shouting 100 yards out, "Unclean, unclean," so people knew to get away. Jesus touched the guy. This stuff is highly contagious. "I am willing," Jesus said. "Be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was perfect. And then Jesus ordered him, "Don't tell anyone." And then we have a passage from Matthew chapter 9. As Jesus went on from there, he had been in one city moving on to another, 2 blind men followed him, calling out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." When you see Son of David in the Bible, that's referring to Jesus. When he had gone indoors, the blind men came to him, and he asked them, "Do you believe that I'm able to do this?" "Yes, Lord," they replied. Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." And their sight was restored. Jesus warned them sternly, "See that no one knows about this." And then in Mark chapter 7, Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre, that's a city or village, and went through Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers in the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, "Ephphatha," which means "be open." At this the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone. Luke chapter 8. When he came to a certain house, he allowed no one to enter with him, except Peter, John, and James. Jesus had been summoned to a house where a man named Jairus' daughter had died. There was no question she was dead. They knew what dead was. This little girl was dead. Allowed no one to enter with him except Peter and John and James and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her, for the child. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." Her spirit returned, and she got up at once. He directed that something be given to her to eat, and her parents were amazed. But he charged them not to tell anyone what had happened. Starting to get a catch on here, the theme we're working toward. Matthew chapter 16. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" Referring to himself. And they said, "Well, some say that you're John the Baptist, others that you're Elijah, others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. So what is it? What's the common theme here? You got it, right? Shut up. Don't tell anybody. That's what he's telling. He's basically doing these remarkable things and then saying, don't tell anyone. Curing leprosy would be like curing cancer today. Can you imagine that somebody comes up with a cure for cancer? Don't tell anybody. We got to keep this under wrap. He restored sight and hearing. What he did basically was put a lot of doctors out of business. And he said, now, keep it under your hat. You know, this would have made the nightly news with Lester Holt if somebody would do this kind of thing today. He's saying just keep it to yourself. Don't tell anyone. You got a grieving father and mother. And they watched Jesus bring their dead little girl back to life. And he said, well, you know, let's just kind of keep this between us. No need to spread it around. Shh. Don't tell anyone. How are they going to keep from telling somebody? That's not going to work. The disciples even figure out that he is the Messiah, that he's the Son of God. They figure out that this man standing with them, living with them, is God. And he tells them, let's just keep that under wraps for now, shall we? And those are all amazing, but how about this one? This is one more. This is called the story of the Transfiguration. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and he led them up a high mountain by themselves. And there he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And while he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them. And a voice from the cloud said, This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said. Don't be afraid. And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, you guessed it, don't tell anyone what you've seen. Don't tell anyone. I know you just witnessed something miraculous. I know that you just saw Moses and Elijah who have been dead and gone for hundreds of years. You heard the very voice of God. You saw me transformed before your very eyes to what I was before I became a human and came to you. You got a glimpse of who I truly am in heaven. But don't tell anyone. Don't tell a soul what you've seen. Well, why? Why would he give those instructions? To me, it doesn't make sense. But then you think of it on second thought, who's going to believe him anyway if they do tell? Hey guys, we were up on the mountain with Jesus and he turned into this bright light. His face was like the sun. His clothes were as white as light. Moses and Elijah were there. We talked with them. We chatted with them. God talked to us. It was amazing. Try telling, yeah, sure, Peter, sure, James and John, you guys need to put the cork back in the wineskin and sober up a bit before you go around telling too many more wild stories. It's kind of like if you've ever been a golfer and you have a golfing buddy who pretty much hacks the course up whenever you play with him, but whenever he plays by himself, he reports he's like 2 under par every time. These miraculous things happen, but no one's ever around to see them occur. That's the position these disciples would have been in. And why would Jesus show them this thing? Why would he perform all these miracles in front of people and then tell them they're supposed to keep it a secret? That part's just never really made sense. I mean, when you do something special, you want people to know about it, right? You hit a home run, you cross the home plate, you point out, you score a touchdown, you jump into the stands with people. You look at me, look at what I've done. You want to draw that attention. If something amazing occurs, it's on the news, it's front page headlines, and if we're involved in it, we brag it up, we tell the world, we sensationalize it. Jesus performs all these miracles. He does things that are really sensational, and he doesn't do backflips. He doesn't call a television station or networks for live coverage. He doesn't make the rounds on the talk show. He doesn't show up on Ellen or Oprah or any of or Jimmy Kimmel or whoever. He just says, shh, don't tell anyone. It's almost like he's teasing us, like he's kind of testing us, or testing these people. He's going to show them all this stuff and then see if they can keep a secret. See if they can follow his commands. He does all this amazing thing. And then he puts a gag order on anybody that was there to witness it. If that confuses you as much as it has me in the past, then you're in good company, because biblical scholars have debated that question for years. Why did he tell people, don't tell anyone? They've come up with a lot of theories. Most of them pretty much end up with the same conclusion, that it was due to a misperception about Jesus himself, a misunderstanding of the Messiah. Some people believed that he was the long-awaited Messiah, but the Jewish people misunderstood who the Messiah was going to be. What they expected was a conquering general. They were under Roman rule. They wanted the Romans conquered, booted out, and they thought the Messiah was going to be this military figure that was going to come in and set everything right. But this guy who kind of claimed to be the Messiah at first before he revealed it, he didn't come to do that. He came meek. He came to die. He didn't come to conquer. He didn't come in glory. It was meekness. He came to deliver people from sin and not from political bondage. That confused people. He also knew that if word got out, that people would view him as nothing more than a miracle man. And that's the only reason they would follow him. That's one of the theories, that people would follow him simply for what they could get from him. You know, they wanted something not so much as a savior as an entertainment spectacle, kind of like the first reality television show in history. It would just be, he'd be a celebrity and nothing more. Plus, if people knew of the miracles, combined with the fact that some of them believed he was the Messiah, their understanding of the Messiah, they would have become all the more enraged when he didn't rise up in revolt against the Romans. They would have automatically demanded that he do so, and he knew that if they did, it would be disastrous for the Jews. The Romans pretty much destroyed Jerusalem 40 years after Jesus' death. He knew that the Jewish nation was in no position to go head-to-head militarily with the Romans. Plus, he needed time alone with his 12 apostles. He needed time to focus on them. The crowds were already tremendous that were following them around. Jesus is like the first rock star. He'd get in a boat and go across the lake to try to get away from them, and they'd be on the other side waiting for him to arrive. And his focus needed to be on the apostles. They were the ones that were going to carry on the work after him. And Jesus simply wasn't interested in fame and celebrity. He came for one reason. Every day of his life, he took another step toward the fulfillment of that reason. He came for the cross. He knew the mission. He kept pressing toward the cross in everything that he did. And he also knew that if his true identity became too well known, that people would rise up and demand that he become the king. And it wasn't time yet. You know, that was a sign that hung over his cross, the king of the Jews. He knew that this wasn't the right time, that he wasn't to take over in that way. He knew that that was not God's plan, that would come about in God's own perfect timing. Those are the theories. Some of them have some truth, and really for the most part they make sense. But I think, and I'm not saying I'm smarter than biblical scholars, I think we're missing the mark by a pretty wide margin on the reason why he said be quiet. I think they've been translating, they've been digging, they've been analyzing the thing to death. And they're attempting to uncover some kind of truth that for some reason God's decided to camouflage. And I don't think God works like that. I mean, why would God go to all the trouble of sending his son and then make his reasons and truth a hide-and-seek game, make them hard to find. To me, that makes less sense than Jesus saying, be quiet. The real answer, I think, is fairly obvious, though it's often overlooked because we're looking for something deeper. And we find it back in that transfiguration story I read to you, Matthew 17. I omitted deliberately the last half of the last verse in that passage. Jesus tells the 3 disciples to remain silent about what they've seen. But then in the last half that I left off, he does something different. He gives them a time frame for their silence. And it's that time frame that gives us the answer to why. The last part of the verse reads, don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. If you're old enough to remember Paul Harvey on the radio, his catch line was always, and now for the rest of the story. In all these cases, Jesus is telling people to stay quiet because they don't yet know the rest of the story. And they won't know until the day arrives that we're going to celebrate next month, the day that we call Easter Sunday. They won't know the rest of the story until Easter Sunday. They won't be able to understand him fully until they find his tomb empty. Because there is no way they can fully comprehend. Not even the apostles could grasp all this until the story was completed and his mission was accomplished. They didn't know enough yet to truly understand who he is and what he came for. There's no way they could handle all of that. But once he'd risen from the grave, once he had defeated death, then it all made sense. Everything he talked about, everything that he had taught it. It's like all the loose ends for the last 33 years that had come together. What he's saying is, when my mission is accomplished, once my work is done, then tell everyone. But for now, be still. Matthew 28. Go and make disciples of all the nations. That was the last order he left us with. Now that the mission's complete, now that you know the rest of the story, tell everybody. Tell everybody what you've seen. Pass it on to your children so they can tell their kids and their grandkids. Tell them everything. Tell them what you've seen. Tell them what you know so they can pass it down to the generations. Tell them what you know and what you've seen so that 2,000 years from now, the people in Henry County, Illinois will know. So that the people from Cambridge can tell their friends and neighbors. Tell them that the lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear, and the dead live. But most of all, tell them how much I love them. Tell them how I was willing to come and live among you and how I was willing to die so that you could be with me forever. Tell them how I gave my life for you and for them. Tell them that their sins are forgiven because I paid the price. And tell them that I have conquered death for all time. Revelation 1:18 says, I am the living one who died. I was dead. And behold, I am alive forevermore. Go and tell them everything, but not until you know the rest of the story. That's the command we live under today. We know the rest of the story. And the assignment Jesus has given us is to go and tell that story. You know, we've talked a lot. I mentioned at the beginning tonight, I don't believe in just going out and just hitting somebody with a broadside about Jesus. I think you have to earn that right. You have to gain their trust and their confidence. But the day comes, if you're going to be a witness for Christ, eventually words are necessary. You model Christ in front of them. You love them you don't love them for the reason that you're going to get to share the story of Jesus. That's manipulation. You're loving somebody then to get something out of it. You just love them because Jesus tells us to love them. But we need to be ready when they do ask the question to tell them the story, the whole story. Christians are not very good at that. If you survey Christians, most of them will tell you that, oh, I'm very comfortable sharing Jesus with someone. They just don't do it. When I was with the Methodist Church, the average Methodist invites somebody to church once every 38 years. Over half of what we call evangelical Christians or Protestants, that's what we'd be classified in, About 25% of us in any given year will invite somebody to church. A lot of us never do. A lot of us never tell anyone about Jesus. We know how, and we say we're willing, but we just never follow through with it. Jesus works through people. God is not an intrusive God. He's not going to come down here and slap somebody upside the head and like the Transfiguration and say, now listen to me, I'm going to tell you about my son. Everything Jesus accomplishes on this earth, he accomplishes through his people. Christians, people who believe in Jesus. And I'm not going to beat you guys over the head about what you need to be doing, but we've got to be prepared to tell them the story. If anybody doesn't know the story, if you're lacking details, come and see me and we'll schedule time once a week or whatever. We'll sit down and go through it. But it's not difficult. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell what you know about Jesus. Tell them your story. How Jesus came into your life. It doesn't take a long time. Don't tell them it all began on a cold winter day in 1948. Just tell them BC. Here's what my life was like before Christ, and then tell them the AC. Here's what my life is like after Christ is in. Just think, you get to heaven someday, and somebody walks up to you and says, you're the reason I'm here. Because you showed me love, and when the time came, you told me the story. You told me about Jesus. Otherwise, I never would have heard it, and otherwise, I would not be here. That's overwhelming to think about that day. I'm just going to leave you with that tonight. We know the story. I had some more things I was going to say, but I think that's good enough. It's one thing to say I'm ready and I'm willing. It's another thing to do it. You got to keep your ears open. The opportunity. I guarantee you that if you work somewhere, people know you're a Christian. If they don't, then that's a whole other subject. There's an old joke that goes around. If you were put on trial for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? So that's the way we live our lives. But I guarantee you people are looking at you. And there will be times when they will hit a rough spot in life, and out of the blue, they'll come to you. Oftentimes they'll say, would you pray for me? I'm going through such and such. The opportunities are there. You got to be ready to love people, and then you got to be ready to tell them the story when the opportunity presents itself. And I do believe, Arthur, that's all I have to say about that. So what's the word I say now? Amen. And everybody else is supposed to say amen.
Amen.
Amen.